Guten Tag, Abend oder Morgen, meine Damen und meine Herren. Willkommen zu mein YouTube-Video zum Oktoberfest. Prost. In other words, welcome to my Oktoberfest video. Cheers. So, in this video, in honor of Oktoberfest 2021, we're going to be talking about the theater theories of Bertolt Brecht, who is one of, debatably the most important theater theorist of the 20th century. I would say he is. For me, he definitely is. German director, theater theorist, artist, performer, etc. Brecht's ideas really transformed theater practice in the 20th century from, he becomes pretty influential in the 1920s up through especially the 1950s, but his influence is felt across the world. I mean, his ideas of the epic theater and the alienation or the distancing effect, the Verfremdungseffekt in German, these really shaped theater on a global scale. By the 1960s, dramatists in the Middle East are big into Brecht. People like Tawfiq al-Hakim, I can't remember his first name. It's al-Bakatir, Ali Ahmed Bakatir, I think it's Ali Ahmed. These people are really doing Brechtian work by the 60s. In West Africa, South Africa, Brecht is making his influence felt, in addition to in European and American theater. So for me, these are the two sort of big ideas, though, that Brecht really introduces. The idea of the epic theater and the alienation effect. So the epic theater, this is Brecht's style. So his plays like Mother Courage and Her Children, or The Good Person of Szechuan, or sometimes translated The Good Woman of Szechuan. These plays reflect Brecht's epic theater techniques. And at the core of the idea of epic theater is essentially that there is a self-aware and socially critical distance between what's being presented on stage and the actor and the audience. So Brecht really sort of takes on the idea of the willing suspension of disbelief, which undergirds realist or naturalist theater, which is that's what you get from the 1700s up through around the time of World War I, the Edwardian era in Britain. You get these naturalistic theater performances with a distinct fourth wall, and stuff like this. And Brecht says, no, this is not what theater should be doing. He makes a distinction between theaters and plays. And he does this, let me see if I... I don't remember where I was reading that distinction. But essentially the distinction is that the epic theater has a pedagogical function. That is, it's meant to teach the audience something about their social, cultural, economic, political, whatever it is, situation by reference to the events that are being seen on stage, which the audience is supposed to read critically and to think about the connections or the links between what they're seeing and their own situation. So as early as 1927, which is pretty early in Brecht's career, he has this very short piece called The Epic Theatre and Its Difficulties. And what he explains at the end of this short piece is, the essential point of the epic theatre is perhaps that it appeals less to the feelings than to the spectator's reason. Instead of sharing an experience, the spectator must come to grips with things. At the same time, it would be quite wrong to try and deny emotions to this kind of theatre. It would be much the same thing as trying to deny emotion to modern science. So Brecht is thinking about this very much in a rationalist way. Theater is meant to provoke the audience's social awareness. And later on, in The Modern Theater is the Epic Theater, he actually has this nice, very convenient list of the differences between dramatic theater and epic theater. And so the characteristics of epic theater that he gives here are narrative. It turns the spectator into an observer but arouses his capacity for action. It forces him to take decisions. Picture of the world. He's made to face something. There's an argument. The spectator is brought to the point of recognition. And the spectator stands outside and studies. That stands outside the action of the play and studies, rather than feeling immersed in it. The human being is the object of the inquiry. And he's alterable and able to alter. Eyes on the course. Each scene for itself. Montage. In curves. So those are some of the techniques that are used. Jumps. Again, these are techniques that are used to sort of break up the action so that we as spectators are never immersed in the experience and never come to see this as these are actual events that are being depicted. We see it as lessons that are being taught through the narrative through the medium of narrative. Man as a process and social being determines thought and reason. So these are the characteristics of epic theater. He goes on later in a short organum for the theater, which I think if you are going to read one thing by Brecht, a short organum for the theater is the thing. If you're going to read one shortish thing. And in A Short Organum for the Theater, he covers a lot of the broad ideas that are distinctly Brechtian, that give his particular theater style its own characteristics. So in point 37, he says, if we ensure that our characters on the stage are moved by social impulses, and that these differ according to the period, then we make it harder for our spectator to identify himself with them. So this is actually one of the big things in epic theater, is Brecht often argues for historical settings to make contemporary arguments. So Mother Courage and Her Children, for instance, is set during the 30 Years' War in the 17th century, but it's about the particular time, mid-20th century, that Brecht is writing. Then we make it harder for the spectator to identify himself with them. He cannot simply feel, that's how I would act, but at most can say, if I had lived under those circumstances. So there's a historical awareness, a contextual awareness. And if we play works dealing with our own time as though they were historical, then perhaps the circumstances under which he himself acts will begin to strike him as equally odd, and this is where the critical attitude begins. So this is, again, a central component of the epic theater, is this idea of you separate the audience from the illusion that they're seeing something in real terms or in real time, and they begin to question the way that their social reality is set up. This is also linked to the alienation effect, the Verfremdungseffekt, which, as I mentioned before, now a lot of people are increasingly translating into English as the distancing effect rather than the alienation effect. Although this translation by John Willett, this translation does use the alienation effect, or the A effect. This is central to the process of epic theater, because these are the techniques that actors use to ensure that audiences don't identify the actors with the characters, don't willingly suspend their disbelief, and also to ensure that the actors themselves don't identify with the characters. So in a piece called The Street Scene, Brecht writes of the A effect. What is involved here is, briefly, a technique of taking the human social incidents to be portrayed and labeling them as something striking, something that calls for explanation, is not to be taken for granted, not just natural. The object of this effect is to allow the spectator to criticize constructively from a social point of view. Can we show that this A effect is significant for our street demonstrator? And then he proceeds to try and do so. So again, the alienation effect is about dividing both the actor and the spectator from the illusion of realism, from the illusions of a naturalistic performance style. And then in a short organum for the theater, he talks more extensively about the distancing effect. For instance, in section 43, he says, "The new alienations are only designed to free socially conditioned phenomena from that stamp of familiarity which protects them against our grasp today." So in other words, this is about encouraging people to question the environment and question the social conditions in which they find themselves. In section 45, he connects this idea of the alienation effect with dialectical materialism. Brecht was a socialist. He was a dedicated socialist. He moved to East Germany after World War II. And so that sort of Marxist idea of like historical materialism, dialectical materialism, that society advances through the self-contradictory nature of socio-cultural conditions. That's central to Brecht's work, and that's the thing that the epic theater sort of aims at, is to get the spectator to question the society that he or she lives in with the intention of moving forward. And Brecht gives some sense of how you can actually do this, some sense of the specific performance techniques, but he's not necessarily prescriptive about this. And so as people write Brechtian influenced plays, as they write plays that, even if they're not sort of epic theater stricto sensu, they are epic theater inflected, like we get increasingly different techniques. But one of the things Brecht says here, this is section 47 of the short organum for the theater, in order to produce A effects, the actor has to discard whatever means he has learned of getting the audience to identify itself with the characters which he plays. Aiming not to put his audience into a trance, he must not go into a trance himself. His muscles must remain loose for a turn of the head, e.g. with tautened neck muscles, will magically lead the spectator's eyes and even their heads to turn with it, and this can only detract from any speculation or reaction which the gesture may bring about. His way of speaking has to be free from parsonical sing-song and from all those cadences which lull the speaker, so that the sense gets lost. Even if he plays a man possessed, he must not seem to be possessed himself, for how is the spectator to discover what possessed him if he does? So ultimately, I mean, these are some of the acting techniques that Brecht encourages, these ways of signaling the distance between the character and the actor, to prevent that illusion that they are one and the same, to always maintain that distance. And people have come up with a lot of ways of doing this, both through performance, but also through the sort of larger context of not individual acting, but of productions themselves. So things like, and some of these techniques are actually written into some of Brecht's plays, but things like placards that indicate what's going on in a scene. You may have a narrator or someone like this who comes out and sort of says, this is the lesson that's to be learned here. Multimedia is a big technique that Brechtian theater producers tend to use. So video projected onto walls, audio involved. I saw a performance of Mother Courage and Her Children several years ago at West Virginia University, at the University Theater Department, where it was, the costuming was this sort of weird quasi like fetish Nazi street gang leather daddies thing, but the main characters all were mic'd, and the mics had this sort of reverb kind of thing. Like it wasn't just, this has enhanced my voice. It was like, this is clear, the dialogue has clearly gone through sound filters. It's gone through distortion and things like this, which, in my opinion, made it very hard to follow a lot of the dialogue, but it broke apart any illusion that what we were seeing was actually real, was actually the events being depicted. I saw another production of Mother Courage and Her Children a few years ago now. I forget where it was. Juniata College. At Juniata College, I saw another production where some of the actors had memorized their lines, some of the actors were carrying scripts, and they periodically would just read off the script. And they were, like, a lot of them were just in, like, gray sweatsuits instead of, like, 16th century costumes, the way they would be if they were trying to naturalistically portray the 30 Years' War. And so again, it's about breaking down the illusion that what you're seeing is real and trying to create distance between the actor and the character, or the character and the actor, as I've been sort of gesturing with it before. And so the spectator says, this is making me aware of the social conditions that are being commented on and how they're similar to the social conditions under which I find myself. And I'm questioning that. This is sort of the core of Brecht's ambition with his dramaturgy and with the epic theater, is to have society moved forward through the lessons of the theater by breaking apart the illusions of the naturalistic and realistic acting techniques and styles that had come before him. Prost.